Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, my name is Monica. I like to post anti-MLM life and some true crime content here on this channel. So if any of that interests you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I would love for you to stick around. In today's video, I am going to be talking about a true crime case. I have not covered an in-depth, I guess you could say, true crime case in, I think almost a month now. The reason why is because the state of the world that we're in right now, I just couldn't get really invested in a case. Because most of these are sad cases. And then, of course, I did still watch true crime content. I'm a huge fan of Stephanie Harlow and Bailey Sarian. I think they're the only two true crime channels that I actually watch. Hey guys, Editing Monica here. Sorry to insert an editing mode of myself so early on in the video, but I, for whatever reason, said the name incorrectly in the beginning of the video, so I will insert what I was trying to say right now. So there was this one video that kept getting recommended to me on YouTube, and I decided to finally watch it, and it was about Holly Bartlett and her mysterious death. So that is the case that we will be discussing today. This video is just purely based on my research, all of the things that I found online. This is all allegedly. Please do your own research when looking into cases as well, and I just wanted to add that in there. So let's get back to the video. And I just finally decided, you know what, I have to watch it because it's being recommended to me for a reason, and it's been recommended multiple times, so why not watch it? And after I watched the video, I decided I had to do some more research of my own and take a look into this case. I'll leave a bunch of links and videos in the description box below as well, in case you want to also go ahead and look into some more information. But the reason why I wanted to cover this is because of her mysterious death. It was ruled an accident, but there were so many things that didn't add up, so I will get into all of that. Holly Bartlett was born on December 26th of 1978 on Boxing Day. I did not know what this day was until I looked it up because she's from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, and I'm in the US. So I did have to look it up because I wasn't too familiar with it, but it's December 26th, 1978. It's the day after Christmas. Holly was a middle child, and she was born with a condition. I'm going to pop it up on the screen, but when I was watching a video of Holly talking about herself and her condition and everything, the way that she pronounced it, if I'm going to say it correctly, is microphthalmia. I don't know if I'm saying that properly, but it is an eye abnormality, and she was born with this. What this abnormality or this condition is, it's just you're born with smaller eyeballs. And in the end, this condition caused Holly to go blind by the age of 13. However, even with her becoming blind at the age of 13, when you watch videos of her, or when you watch videos of her family and friends talking about her, she just seemed like a very independent woman. Her one sister said in an interview that she had this nothing to lose kind of an attitude, that she was just as confident. She was a confident child, but she was also a confident woman. Even when she didn't feel that way, she always came across as confident. She was very social. During her adult life, she had a very busy adult life. She was working for a nonprofit. Along with that, Holly was also taking swing dancing classes. She decided to one day go skydiving, and she just had a very, very busy life. Along with going to her job and also doing all of these other really amazing things that even I have not done yet, Holly was going to school for her master's in order to get her degree in public administration. Unfortunately, during this time, even though she was keeping very busy, she was at her parents' house most of the time because her father was battling lung cancer. With all of this happening, sadly, her father did pass a few weeks after her death. But with all of this happening, she decided she needed to take just a break and just hang out with her friends. So on March 26th of 2010, Holly decided to go out for dinner and drinks with some friends from school. That night, it was said that Holly did drink approximately 6 drinks within 6 hours. However, towards the end of the night, she switched to drinking water. In my personal opinion, I do think that she was probably trying to maybe sober up, and that's why she was starting to drink water instead of continuing to drink alcohol. But it's important to note that Holly was 123 pounds and she was 4'11". The reason why this is important to note is because of her blood alcohol level. When she was found the following morning on March 27th, which we will get into, but when she was found the following morning, they were able to find out that at the time of finding her, she had a blood alcohol level of 0.09%. In Canada, the legal driving limit is 0.08% blood alcohol, and for her height, weight, and gender, it would have taken approximately 14 hours for her to drop down to 0% blood alcohol. So because of this and because of how many hours were between her drinking and them finding them, allegedly she was probably drunk the night before. However, the night before, on March 26th, Holly decided to call a taxi at 11:18 p.m. She did have to call a second taxi at 11:55 p.m. So it's unsure if maybe she ignored the first taxi and they drove off, or if maybe the taxi canceled so she had to get another one. But when they interviewed some of her friends that were with her that night, there was one friend who said that she did guide Holly to the taxi, but she didn't have to help her. So I'm going to assume, now this is just speculation, I'm going to assume that probably what she meant by that was that Holly just needed someone to guide her outside to where the taxi was, but maybe she wasn't stumbling. Maybe she didn't need help getting into the car. Maybe she didn't need help because she wasn't as wasted, I guess you can say, as some people might have thought. Or maybe she was, and she just was very good at still being somewhat in, I guess you can say, in, not necessarily in the right mind, but maybe you can kind of say it that way. Unfortunately, Holly never made it home after this taxi ride. On the morning of March 27th, 2010, an iron worker or a steel worker showed up for his shift at the job site. He noticed something red underneath or next to this one abutment that was at the base of the McKay Bridge. So the employee was just walking towards it to see what it was, and he found from a distance that he believed it was a person. And when he walked up to the person, it was Holly. At this point in time, she was still alive. They did call 911. They rushed her to the hospital. However, she was unconscious for 5 hours prior to them finding her. And when she was found, it was said that she had several bruises on her face. She had cuts on her hands and knees, her legs, and I believe several ribs were also broken. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and hypothermia, because it was cold. It was wintertime, so it was cold. And I believe in the one video that I was watching, I believe they said that it was -6 degrees outside. So she had been laying out there. And unfortunately, within 48 hours of bringing her to the hospital, Holly was pronounced dead, and she did die in the hospital. But within 72 hours of finding her, police officers ruled her death an accident. I think that it was easy for them to rule this death an accident instead of suspicious because of the fact that she was blind. And I think that they probably had this image in their head of poor blind girl gets lost getting home and she falls off this abutment. But these police officers, in my opinion, did not give Holly or anyone who is blind enough credit, because yes, they might not be able to see with their eyes, but they're able to see, in quotes, with other senses that we as humans have. Holly was trained when she went blind. She was trained on how to be able to move around safely and independently, basically just not having someone help her get around because she's blind. According to Peter Parsons, who I'll get into him a little bit later, but according to Peter Parsons, he said that Holly was one of his most skilled clients. In my opinion, I do think that police officers or law enforcement probably didn't give her enough credit, because just because she was blind doesn't I guess you can say it doesn't make the case, oh, it's easy to close because poor blind girl gets drunk, is disoriented, and doesn't know how to get home, so she falls to her death. If you know someone who's blind, you know that they have other ways of getting around. So I would maybe understand that a little bit more if she had just gone blind and maybe she wasn't trained enough to be able to walk around on her own or anything of that nature. But she had been blind since she was 13 years old. So as soon as they said that, a lot of friends and family were kind of not necessarily confused, but they wanted answers. To keep going with this case, investigators did say that what they thought had happened, the theory that they had, is that Holly, and I'll pop up on the screen the actual diagram of the, I guess you could say, the route that they believe that she took. So investigators believe that Holly had gotten out of the taxi and was drunk and disoriented, and that she wandered away from the entrance to the apartment and walked about 350 meters away from the building to the Ken Crest apartment, and then somehow managed to crawl underneath the fence up onto a very steep abutment, which was under the McKay Bridge, and then fell 10 meters to the ground below. When they first found Holly, they could not find her cane. Holly, yes, she did have a cane that helped her in getting around independently. According to reports, law enforcement didn't even know at the time of finding her that she did have a cane, and that she did have a cane that she used on a daily basis. Once they did find out about Holly having a cane, they brought in canine unit, they investigated the whole entire area, and they said that they could not find her cane. Which brings me to March 28th of 2010. Rendell Pittman and Patricia Pittman, along with some other friends of Holly, friends, family, they decided to kind of, I guess, take things into their own hands. So they started looking around for her cane, because there's no way that Holly would have gone anywhere without her cane. They came upon an area that at the time, because it was wintertime, it was easier to be able to find things because there were no leaves on the trees or on the brush that was in the area. Patricia Pittman was the one that found Holly's cane, propped up against the fence. And what was kind of odd is that, why did nobody find this before? So it was strange, because they had the canine unit out there, they had investigators out there looking for her cane, and they could not find it until March 28th, when Patricia Pittman was able to locate it. It was said that it took about 2 hours for investigators to come to the scene. I cannot find 100%, but there was some, I believe it was either one of the links, I'll leave it linked below, but either a video that I watched or a link that I was reading, like an article that I was reading, saying that they allegedly did not fingerprint the cane, which, wouldn't you think to do that to see if maybe there were other fingerprints on the cane? Because maybe, just maybe, someone had placed it there, allegedly. Because how is it that they couldn't find the cane before? And let me just tell you, the canine unit, those dogs are very well trained, at least from what I have seen and what I've read about. But how did nobody find her cane until the 28th? When she was found on the 27th, investigators had been there, and it was in plain sight. It was propped up on a fence. So I find it odd that they didn't fingerprint the cane, but allegedly they didn't fingerprint the cane. There's one really great documentary to watch, which I will leave linked below, and it was a journalist who decided to take matters into her own hands because she had seen this this article about Holly, and she said something wasn't adding up. Something just didn't make sense. So she wanted to investigate it further. In that documentary, they did do an interview with one of Holly's sisters. That sister came up with this idea, and she was talking to her mom, and because the last person to see Holly alive was the taxi driver. The sister talked to the mom. Marion is Holly's mom's name, and she said, why don't they talk to the taxi driver and see if maybe the taxi driver had a GPS on the car? Maybe they'd be able to kind of retrace everything and see if maybe there was a point in time where he took a wrong turn. Maybe he didn't actually drop her off in front of the entrance, that kind of a thing. And so the sister told Marion to talk to investigators and ask them about this. According to the sister in this interview, they responded with, Mrs. Bartlett, you watch too much CSI. But officials did go ahead and interview the taxi driver and ask him about that night, ask him just the regular questions, because like I've said multiple times, he was the last person to see her alive. He had told police that he dropped her off at the entrance to her building. However, when she had gotten into his cab, she sat behind the driver's side instead of the passenger side. But as I'll talk about Peter Parsons in a minute, Peter was saying that she wouldn't have sat behind the driver because she knows to sit on the passenger side because that's going to be the closest to where the car would stop. That was just a common thing that I guess was part of their training. And so he thought that that was a little strange that she sat behind the driver instead of on the passenger side. But the taxi driver has said that when he dropped her off, she got out of the driver's side and she was walking in the wrong direction, but that the taxi driver just drove off. With all of that being said, they started looking into surveillance footage, all of that kind of stuff. So they did look at the McKay Bridge. They looked at the surveillance footage there to see if maybe she had jumped off of the bridge or maybe she was on the bridge at some point, but there was no video footage of her on the bridge or jumping off the bridge. So they rolled that out of their investigation. However, the documentary that I keep referencing in this video, they talked to the superintendent who used to be in charge of the apartment complex. That superintendent said that at the time they did have security footage. Officials didn't go to him until a few months later. They didn't even ask to see the security footage. They just asked him a few questions and that was it. And unfortunately, since 2010, all of that footage is gone. It was discarded. This is where we're going to move on to friends and family wanting answers, asking questions, doing their own investigation, and just looking into this a little bit more, because friends and family didn't believe that poor drunk blind girl falls to her death. They didn't believe that. They didn't believe that, and honestly, I don't believe that either. I really truly don't. I think that officials just didn't give blind people enough credit, to be completely honest. But as I've been talking about Peter Parsons a little bit, so Peter Parsons is an orientation and mobility specialist with CNIB, which is a volunteer agency dedicated to assisting Canadians who are blind or living with some kind of vision loss. And that is where he met Holly. That is where he said that she was the most skilled client out of all of the clients that he's ever had. And Peter was in charge of helping Holly to get around safely, to be able to be independent and not have to worry about anybody else. Peter, his father, Brian Parsons, along with some of Holly's friends and family, decided to look into the case further. Something wasn't adding up. Brian Parsons decided to investigate this independently because he was a private investigator and he did have his own, I don't know if it's called a firm or a company, but he did have his own company, and he in the past was a military police officer. When Peter was told about how she walked, and I'll pop up the diagram again, but when he was told about how she walked away from her building and then got on the wrong side of the taxi, the route that she took from the apartment complex to where she would end up being underneath the abutment or near the abutment, Peter said that there's no way that Holly wouldn't have noticed the decline in the driveway walking down. So that was one of the first things that he said, that her walking down this driveway, that would have been a red flag that something isn't right, that she's walking down this decline, along with hearing traffic in front of her. So he went on to talk about how that's called perpendicular traffic. And then he said that if she would have actually walked the way that they said, the route that she took, then traffic would have been parallel to her and it would have been on her left side, which she knew that that wasn't right. That traffic would have to be on her right side in order to get home. So Peter said that there were a lot of things that just did not add up in this route that they said that Holly took, that she was just way more skilled to know, especially if she did walk onto this abutment and if she did crawl onto this abutment, there was a very steep incline on the abutment as well that she would have noticed. They started talking to other people that were saying that with this abutment, if she really was crawling, she would have had her hands out and known that there was nothing there for her to continue crawling to, which is when they decided that they needed to talk to the taxi driver again. They needed to talk to him. They needed to look into him a little bit more. Maybe he saw something a little bit more than he did and he was just afraid to talk to law enforcement. Maybe that's just what it was. And because he was the last known person to see Holly alive, that was another reason why they wanted to talk to him. Brian Parsons spoke to police about the taxi driver. They told him that it was a normal taxi ride, that she paid him. She walked across the street in the wrong direction, and that the driver decided to drive off. Since Brian Parsons was investigating on his own to kind of see if he can get any more answers, he went to Holly's apartment and he noticed that in the one spot there was a number 7 bus that was just sitting there. So he started brainstorming and he thought, maybe, just maybe, if this bus was there every single night, which he did look into, and yes, it was there every single night, he decided that what if that bus had some kind of camera on it? What if there was some kind of footage on that bus from the night that the taxi driver dropped Holly off in front of the entrance, as this driver was saying? He went to the police and unfortunately they told him that they could not give him that footage from that camera because the bus did have a camera, but unfortunately they could not give him that footage for privacy reasons. That's all that they told him. So that's when Brian Parsons gave the case back to police and told them, well, he was very, very firm and said that you guys need to look into the bus. You need to see if there's some kind of footage, and don't just watch from the time of the taxi dropping her off and driving away. Watch all of it to see if maybe the driver came back. Maybe there's a missing piece to the puzzle that they'd be able to look into. Police reviewed the footage, and sure enough, part of the footage, it does show that at one point when the bus was driving down the street, there was an intersection that they saw the taxi driver at. It looked as though he had his blinker on, that he was going back to Holly's apartment complex. That's when they decided they needed to interview the taxi driver again, because why was he going back in that direction? He should have been long gone at that point. The driver said that the reason why he was coming back was because after about 2 minutes of driving, he felt bad that he had seen her trip on the curb. He wanted to come back and make sure that she was okay. And like I said, it was said that this happened within 2 minutes. This new theory that officers came up with was that she fell, and when she fell, she probably hit her head, which caused her to be even more disoriented. Police would end up telling Brian Parsons about this new information, and they had told him that they already called the driver, and they said that Brian Parsons is going to come talk to you because he is also investigating this case. Brian went to the taxi driver and he was talking to him, and he said that something felt off, and he said that there was something about this driver that just there was something weird, and the fact that the driver had changed his story a few times already was also suspicious. So Brian asked the taxi driver, hey, can you take me on the route that you went on with Holly. First and foremost, the driver did say that when Holly had gotten into the car that she didn't talk to him. He knew that she was drunk, but that she didn't talk to him. It was a very silent ride, but he noticed that she was rummaging through her purse. So Brian Parsons had asked the taxi driver, well, why do you think she was rummaging through her purse? And the driver said she was probably looking for her cane. And then Brian Parsons has said in an interview that he noticed that as soon as the driver said this, he kind of almost tried to take it back, and he said something along the lines of, oh, well, I wouldn't know that because I didn't know that she had a cane. That must have been planted in my head. That detail must have been planted in my head during all of this and all of the, I guess, questioning and everything of that nature. So Brian thought that was a little bit of a red flag. He said, well, maybe he's going to start to open up a little bit and tell us a little bit more of the story so that we can piece all of this together and figure out what happened to Holly that night. The taxi driver had shown Brian Parsons where he had turned around in order to go check on Holly. Now, when they started driving down this driveway, it was on the other side of the apartment complex. So all of a sudden, Brian said that the driver got really nervous and he said, wait a minute, I don't know where this goes. I don't know where this road is going to take us. So Brian said that he seemed like he was concerned about talking about this. And the taxi driver ended up eventually confessing that he ripped Holly off, that he took more money from her than he should have, and that he felt bad about it. Apparently, though, some of Holly's belongings were outside of her complex, including her wallet. They weren't in this spot. So it was almost as if someone just like threw it out a window, and it was just weird. The plot thickens. At this point, they also started talking to someone named Tom Martin. Tom Martin was a homicide detective for 15 years. So of course, he knows what to look for. He knows about some of the warning signs. So Tom decided that he was going to look into this a little bit further too. The medical examiner's office did give Tom some kind of information. After looking through the evidence, after everyone else doing their own investigation and their own questioning, just looking into things a little bit further, Tom Martin said, now this is his opinion, this isn't factual, this is just speculation and him trying to try to piece everything together. As I've said multiple times, I'm a broken record at this point, but he was trying to get more answers. So he came up with a new theory that maybe this could have also happened to Holly. He believes that the driver stopped at that location that was behind the complex instead of in front of the entrance, because Holly did have skills to be able to get home even though she was blind. She had skills to be able to help her. And what they thought had happened, or what Tom thought had happened, was that maybe there was some kind of argument in the car. Maybe Holly knew that the driver had taken a wrong turn, or maybe whatever the case may be, but she maybe got into a little bit of an argument. Maybe it was a heated argument, could have possibly escalated, and she dropped her belongings and her cane on the floor of the taxi. So maybe that's what happened. And when she got out of the car, she heard that traffic was on her right-hand side, so she knew that she had to keep walking in that direction. But at the same time, she was behind the complex. There was no clear path for her to go. She didn't have her cane. So what Tom Martin thinks probably happened was she was trying to walk around the building, and at one point she could have slipped and fallen, and that's where all of her other injuries came from, because he said that the injuries that she had, that the medical examiner's office told him about, the injuries that she had didn't really add up to her just falling off of the abutment, that something just didn't add up. So what he believes happened, could have possibly happened, was she fell, and at that point she started crawling to see if maybe she could somehow make it back, that maybe she was just looking for a way to get home, and unfortunately she had crawled to that spot underneath the abutment or next to the abutment, and that's where she stopped. And maybe she wasn't maybe at that point she just wasn't feeling well, or maybe she just could not physically go any further. So she just laid there, and that's where they found her the next morning. With all of that being said, I'm going to give my final thoughts on this case because it is a very, very sad case. I think that the investigation was done very poorly. I think that police officers were too quick to judge and think that this poor blind girl got drunk and walked the wrong way and fell off of this abutment. I think that the investigation was not conducted properly. My opinion, though. Even though Holly did drink that night, and yes, she could have been somewhat disoriented, I don't think that the original theory of what the investigation said of her just walking, I don't see how that would have happened, because eventually, even if you are disoriented, I feel like eventually she would realize that something's wrong, and maybe she would go and knock on someone's door for help, because she was a social person. She was very independent and she was skilled. So I do think that the original theory that officers or the investigation said, I don't think that that original theory is correct. But again, that's just speculation on my part, my opinion. I do think that Tom Martin's theory makes more sense. I don't think that the taxi driver purposely left her there, or I don't think that the taxi driver purposely tried to hurt her. Can I be wrong? Yes, I can be, but I don't think that he purposely wanted to hurt her. Maybe there was a disagreement, and maybe Holly said, you know what, I'm going to walk from here. I don't know, and I don't think that we'll ever know, because a lot of the evidence that they have, a lot of it is gone. Security footage from the apartment complex has been discarded already, and they didn't talk to the superintendent of that apartment complex until months later. So I think that this whole investigation was conducted very, very poorly. And I do hope that Holly's family will maybe one day find the answers that they need. And I do hope that they are able to cope with what happened and be able to live their lives, and hopefully one day justice will be brought for Holly and we'll all find out what actually happened to her. So I did just want to say that I hope Holly is resting in peace, and I do hope that the family is doing okay. And that's just what I had for you guys today. If you have any other further questions, comments, theories, leave them in the comment section below. I would love to hear what the rest of you have to say about this case, because it is a very mysterious case. That's just, you know, there was never a full-blown, here's the evidence that shows this is what happened. So I do hope that one day we're able to find out what happened to Holly. But anyway, if you have watched up to here, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to those who watch my videos, whether you watch it for free, Patreon, my channel members, whatever the case may be. I thank you all for coming to my channel. And this is Monica reporting to you live from a highway. Bye.